Hi, everyone. Welcome to the San Francisco Law Library. I'm Diane Rodriguez, the director. And I just want to let you know off the bat, you've seen the signs, but this program is being recorded and transcribed. So the San Francisco Law Library is the only public law library in San Francisco. We are free and open to everyone, and we have lots of free legal databases and expert librarians to help you do your research. So if you'd like to stay after and find out about any of our services, we'd be happy to talk to you. Just some housekeeping items. We have restrooms in the library. The men's room is over straight ahead, and then down the front of the library to the right is the ladies' lounge. Mike will be here for some questions after the program as well. So just, know you can ask your questions after. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Widener, one of the most respected experts in the world of rare law books and legal history. Mike has spent more than 3 decades shaping how scholars, students, and collectors understand the material and the history of law. He's served 15 years as the Rare Book Librarian and lecturer in legal research at the Yale Law School, where he built a renowned collection and transformed the way rare legal materials are taught and used there. Before Yale, he led special collections at the University of Texas at Austin, and he established programs that remain influential across the field. His scholarly output is equally distinguished. Michael's the author and co-author of numerous books and exhibition catalogs, including Histories of Legal Literature, Laws, Picture Books, and the Flowering of Civil Law. His work has twice received major awards from the American Association of Law Libraries, reflecting both the quality and impact of his research. Beyond his publications, he's a gifted educator. He's taught regularly at the Rare Book School, and his lectures around the world, from Melbourne to Rome, demonstrate his rare ability to make century-old books feel vivid and relevant. He currently serves as the U.S. advisor to leading rare book firms in London and Verona, continuing to guide the stewardship of important historical collections. What makes Michael's work so compelling is his belief that law books are more than just texts. They're artifacts that reveal how legal ideas were created, shared, and understood. His career invites us to see local history not just as doctrine, but as a living cultural record. So please join me in welcoming Mike Widener.
Thanks, Diane, for the introduction, and thanks for having me here. And also to Fiona Afram, one of the on the staff here, has been a huge help. I just wanted to give a shout out to her. So, I worked in academic law libraries for 30 years, but I'm not a lawyer. And maybe that's why I gravitated to the pictures, because I'm not a lawyer. So real quickly, I'm going to talk about how I began to look for pictures in all the wrong places, how I defined the scope of the collection that I built at Yale. We're going to look at lots of examples. My talk is about legal literature, also a little bit about collection building in general. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. Oftentimes, if there's an image up there that you have a question about, it'll be easier to deal with it right then rather than wait to the end. So off we go. So the origins, how this got started. So here's a typical law book of the late 19th century, just words, words, and words. Not much different from law books today, not even much different from what you see online. And the stereotype about law books, it's true. Don't get me wrong there. The vast majority of law books, old and new, English, American, continental, are purely textual. So a law book from any time period is the last place most people would expect to find illustrations. So this is the book that changed my mind about this. Early in my career, a law professor at the University of Texas asked us to buy this book. And it's a treatise on the laws about alluvium, about how changes in a watercourse affect property boundaries. So I open this book and I see these wonderful illustrations. There's actually another edition of it right over here that the San Francisco Law Library owns. And it made sense to me right away. These are complex issues. It's much easier to explain these things with pictures and text than just with text alone. And once I started looking it got me curious. I started looking around, and I found more and more examples. And then when I got to the Yale Law Library, I finally had the resources and the support to start actively collecting them. Now, I found lots in the existing collection. I ended up buying, while in the 15 years I was there, about 1,200 titles with illustrations. So collecting is an art in some sense, and much of the art lies in determining a collection's scope. So we're going to talk about that. This whole thing began really as kind of pure research. I didn't know what I was going to find when I started out. I said, let's just look and see what happens. So first I concentrated on books of the law, books that are written by lawyers, for legal practice, like this one here. And I wanted illustrations that had legal content, not just decorations. So here, this court scene is a great example. There's one of the most common types of illustrations you find in law books. I had to decide what to leave out. So some illustrations don't have much to say about the law itself. Coats of arms, they're pretty, they didn't interest me. Same thing with portraits of rulers. Yeah, so what? I decided to exclude portraits of authors. Actually, they do have something to say about legal literature. This anonymous contemporary critic kind of implied that these portraits were used to camouflage texts of dubious quality. And this is actually a perfect example of that. What they would do in England in the 17th century and 18th century, they would go rummage through a dead judge's chambers and find supposed law reports, reports that the judge never intended to publish. So they do have some sense, in some sense, they do have something to say about legal literature and the profession. In addition to books of the law, I also started collecting books about the law. Things like this collection of anecdotes of the legal profession, things on law reform, satires, popular trial accounts, and so forth. And I think these are important because they provide views from outside of the legal profession or from inside, showing how lawyers want themselves to be portrayed to the society at large. And as illustrations disappeared from traditional law books in the 19th century, you see more and more and more of them in this popular literature about the law. I collected modern and antiquarian titles. They overlapped with other interests we had that I had at Yale, collecting things like law and modern social movements, what we call juvenile jurisprudence, books about the law written for children. And these are also important. In constitutional law, for instance, some of the most lively and passionate debates about constitutional law are taking place in pamphlets like this. One of the products of this was a major exhibition, big exhibitions we did in 2017 at the Grolier Club. And also we did a companion exhibit with my co-curator back there, my wife, Emma Molina Widener, on Around the World with Law's picture books. And these illustrate two different ways of divvying up the illustrations. The Grolier exhibit we did it according to their function, books, illustrations that staging the law, arguing the law, laughing at the law. And Around the World, we did an exhibition where we had law-related book illustrations from every continent except for Antarctica. So that was a fun one. So today I did it a little bit differently. I looked at some librarians will know possibly about the Getty's Art and Architecture Thesaurus. So I took visual works by subject time. So that's how we're going to look at them today. So first we're going to look at allegories, works that employ symbolic fictional figures, etc. Images that are designed to be read. And so the most common of this is Justitia, Lady Justice. I bought lots of books only because they had an image, law books, because they had an image of Justitia in them. The rest of the book, really, wasn't too concerned about. This is a book of legal maxims. Justitia is one of the four cardinal virtues. And this brings up an important issue. This English book conveniently gives all four of them. I don't know how many people today would know what the prudence or fortitude or temperance, what that image was, right? But Justitia, it's incredible the range of that. Everybody recognizes that. You see examples today from Africa, Japan, Iraq. I mean, it's incredible the reach that image has taken. I collected probably over 400 titles with allegorical images while we were there, while I was at Yale. This is the first image of Justitia that I'm aware of that appeared in a law book in 1508. Really nice image. This shows kind of an overlap with fine art. This is the Statutes of Nuremberg. This woodcut is by Albrecht Dürer. And it's really interesting. If you look at it, at first glance, it looks like an engraving because of the fine detail, but it's a woodcut. An expert, Aaron Blake at the Folger, described this as Albrecht Dürer showing off about how good, I mean, because that is, for a woodcut, that's an incredible detail. Justitia becomes used as an attribute of the ruler, the lawmaker as the source of justice, the dispenser of justice. As in this image here from criminal procedure for Bohemia. And these title pages, these frontispieces are like visual, someone described them as visual manifestos, combining authority, erudition, and market appeal. And this also is a good illustration of how these images are designed to be read. If you look at the ribbons, this is what this is saying about criminal law. Bad men hate to sin from their fear of punishment. Good men hate to sin from their love of goodness. So that's in Venice, Justitia was actually adopted. She became known as Venetia, the personification of the Republic of Venice. This is one of my favorite images, and we have an example of it over here. Beccaria's treatise on crime and punishment, one of the most important books of the Enlightenment, really a call to reform on about a criminal procedure and the treatment of crime. And it's just a wonderful image. You see Justitia there turning away in disgust from the executioner, saying basically, no, this is not how we are supposed to administer justice. And instead, she's looking down at these tools, basically showing what we have to do with the criminal is reform them, make them become once again useful and productive members of society. I just love this image. So when you have hundreds of images of this, like I did, you begin assembling what really constitutes a data set. You can start actually making some interesting conclusions and formulating new questions about this imagery and what it's saying and where it's going, how this icon has been transformed, how it's adapted to new audiences and new purposes. Also, it's important because books provide context for these images that artworks often don't have, because they were done at a specific time for a specific purpose at a specific place and associated with a specific text. It gives you all these contextual information that oftentimes you have to really look hard to find for a standalone piece of artwork. That's why I think they're really valuable as a source of images. So there's some other allegorical images. Here's the the Tower of Justice, and the Beast of Injustice over here, which I love. You see, he's gobbling up the innocent in his mouth, and all the legs you see there. There's things like disobedient youth, negligent bishops, iniquitous princes, immodest women, on and on and on. Just a wonderful. And there's text, there's essays associated with each of these images. These are two of about 6 or 7 images in this book. The Judgment of Solomon, for those of you familiar with the biblical story, is another popular allegorical image. Another one of my favorites, this is a legal bibliography by a German scholar, Karl Ferdinand Hummel. And basically, what he's saying here, I'm telling you what the good stuff is, who the good authors are. I'm separating them out from all the barnyard animals, these other people. He's one of the rare instances of a legal scholar with a sense of humor. I just love that image. This is another great one. This is a treatise on about reforming the divorce laws in France. It's a product of the French Revolution. And the caption down here, the guy saying, you see this sandal? When it hurts my foot, I take it off. And it's incredible. There's actually, there's a Mexican song, a ranchera song from the 30s or 40s that says almost the same things. It's La chancla que yo tiro, no la vuelvo a levantar. The sandal that I throw away, I will never pick up again. It's another great, anyway, I love that. Here, this is St. Ives or St. Ivo of Carmarthen, the patron saint of lawyers. He was the only parish priest in the Middle Ages who was canonized as a saint. He was a trained lawyer. He was an advocate on behalf of the poor. And you see there, he's turning away from the rich people with their bags of money and extending his arm out to aid the poor, the widows, the orphans, etc. This is from a book, by the way, The Charitable Arbiter. That's really probably the very first book advocating for legal aid for the poor. So let me, Ulrich Tengler's Layenspiegel, the Mirror of the Layman. This is a legal encyclopedia for lay officials in Germany. Went through several editions. It's heavily illustrated. There's 31 woodcuts that have very strong religious element, and really the struggle between good and evil goes right through it. This is from a book really from a contemporary of Martin Luther. So it's from that same time of religious ferment. You see here, again, the struggle for good and evil. God is the source of law. Law is an instrument of God. Here you see the advocate, and there's a demon whispering in one ear and an angel in the other. Again, the struggle between good and evil. It's apocalyptic in tone, the themes of the last judgment. And then finally, kind of hell on earth, the punishments for evildoers. So that's it for that. Technical illustrations. That's another big category. So the first one of the most common illustrations in law books from the Middle Ages up through the 17th and 18th centuries were trees of consanguinity. I find these really interesting because it's a way of converting, using imagery to illustrate legal concepts. So here it's degrees of relationship, which are important in all sorts of things, inheritance, who gets the heir, what legally constitutes incest. Can you marry your third cousin or not? So and it puts all of this into a graphic form. So this is from a medieval manuscript, and all of these, many of these are associated with this essay by Giovanni D'Andrea on trees of consanguinity and affinity. This, I believe, is the very first illustration to appear in a printed law book. And it went through many, many editions. And these trees kind of morphed over time. And again, another example of how when you start getting dozens and hundreds of examples, you can start seeing how things change, how they gradually move from very tree-like to more schematic sorts of images. The last one is from Blackstone's commentaries from 1765. And this, I've never been able to figure out what that is. But if somebody has an idea, I'd love to hear it. Also,
Cake.
excuse me?
It's a piece of cake.
Well, okay. Trees of affinity, another one, relationship by marriage. And they started using these tree diagrams for all sorts of things. This is a tree of jurisdiction. Here's a tree of property law for a proposal to for a new civil code for Portugal from 1822. And then here for an American example that they went all out. This is basically a guide to legal research. With each one of those little leaves there is some sort of a concept. I don't know how you navigate that. It's like mind-boggling, but there's instructions there how to use the tree. Other technical illustrations. This is a work by Bartolus, the greatest legal author of the Middle Ages. Hugely important. It's a treatise on water rights along the Tiber River. Actually, a book I bought from Joe Luttrell several years ago. But it's a wonderful book. Also interesting. Again, it shows how illustrations can help to explain legal concepts. Also interesting. Bartolus himself, in his introduction, writes that the concept of this book came to him in a dream, which is, I think, another unique thing in legal literature. Here's Italians seem to be very fond of doing these books on water law. Here's a book on the law of aqueducts from 1707. Another book, Italian book on servitudes. Easements is what that involves. Interesting, these are what are called throwout plates. So there's about 12 of these, I don't know how many, in the back of this book folded up. But what it allows you to do is while you're reading the text about numbers 9, 10, and 12, you can actually have the illustrations right next to you instead of flipping to the back of the book and going back and forth. Really, interesting concept. Also, I'll tell you, Italian books have the most wonderful paper, and you can see some of it there. It's just, but anyway, there's that. Other technical drawings. This is the agricultural laws of Rome, and this is one of 4 of these really stunning, detailed engravings of the life cycle of a locust. Who would expect to find that in a law book? A more disturbing example, this is the criminal code of the Austrian Empire. These are technical drawings on instruments of judicial torture. This is not punishment, but how you elicit testimony. By Maria Teresa, the Empress, was actually Marie Antoinette's mom. So this is a whole bunch of these. And more modern, you start seeing applications in things like patent law. This is from the litigation over the Bell telephone patent. This is a book on the trademark and patent law of Cuba. Also, is kind of a great example of the history of commercial art. So not really of interest for not just for lawyers, but for other people. Just wonderful, these full color illustrations. Another really interesting example, again, kind of application of illustrations as evidence. This is a brief by a Mexico City lawyer defending a client, and he's one of several photographs. Basically, he's showing, using actors and photography, that the prosecution's theory of the case is wrong. It doesn't work. And he shows exactly why. Really innovative use of photography in a legal document. And finally, this for technical, one of my favorite illustrations. This is from a book for high school students on Aboriginal land title claims in Australia. And it shows in such a succinct way two enormously different concepts of the nature of property rights. This land is us versus this land is ours. I mean, that's just a great illustration, I think, for understanding legal concepts. So, genre pictures, scenes from everyday life. There's lots of these. Here's a book on Dutch inheritance law with a lawyer at work, kind of nice image. They like to brag about, how learned their profession is, but it's also interesting because you can see what an office might have looked like. The books with the 4 edges shelved facing out. This other one, another great image here of this forlorn lawyer or legal scholar with his head in his hand. This is an example. Illustrations like this in the early period often would be reused in all sorts of books. So in another book, it could have been a doctor or a philosopher or whoever. So this is a very similar to that last image. This is a guide for law students on how to study the law. And again, you see the same pose there. The guy, and if you look at the book titles, these are all law books that surround it. All of these I can identify just about every single one of those law books. What you see is teapot, his chessboard, his swords, his pistols. And I find it kind of interesting. He's surrounded by law books, but the book that's on his desk there is the Bible. I guess he's praying for divine intervention. So another great, this is a very early example of kind of more popular literature about the law. This is a kind of a satire on law, but you can actually see what a lawyer's office might have looked like, especially kind of people lower down in the profession. Interesting thing, look at all the bags. What that is, that's their filing system. That's their filing cabinet. And that was really a common way. One of the great purchases I made, one of the last ones I made at Yale, actually bought a collection of French legal documents from the 18th century that were still in the bag. This is just too good to be true. Also, I just want to point out the Latin verse that opens it. Lawyers are provident besides, for prudently they for themselves provide. So, just a great. Here's a treatise on inheritance and legacies, and you see basically they're preparing for an auction, kind of divvying up who gets to get Grandpa's silverware and his good suit of clothes. This was done by a Nuremberg publisher, Widener, and here's another one on property boundaries. And again, shows lawyers at work. This publisher did about a dozen of these. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't kept buying one law book after another German law book. I had a German book dealer who kept feeding me these things. And there's actually at least a dozen of these. And it points to the role of these illustrations as marketing tools, and now they're also kind of interesting from the other aspect. It's kind of showing what life was like. Here, these are 3 examples from a number more, maybe a dozen, maybe 20 more, of Dutch law books that have these engraved title pages of court scenes, very common. And the interesting thing about them, that there's one thing they all have in common. First off, some of these are courtrooms you can actually still visit in the Netherlands today. But the thing that's really interesting, the element that they all invariably have in common, there's always a dog running around in the foreground. That's just fascinated me. And I've asked several people, there's different theories of that, why, what that's supposed to symbolize. Here's some examples from one of the most successful illustrated law books, Dan Howder's handbook on the criminal law of Northern Europe. It has about over 50 woodcut illustrations. This book went through 40 editions between 1554 and 1660, 24 illustrated editions. It was published in Latin, in French, Dutch, German. I was able to acquire 20 different illustrated editions when I was at Yale. But they're fascinating. They give a whole idea, again, as genre pictures are really interesting. This is a book on negligent homicide. Here, it shows also process. Here's the guy getting served his papers. You've been served. And on the other side, this is regarding the law about against counterfeiting. And so what you have here, you have a whole, you get a look at what a metal worker's shop would have consisted of, which makes it in. And also you get some kind of what today would be unusual crimes. This is what I guess you would call consensual adultery. So the husband is over there tending the fire and said, knock yourselves out, and the crime of grave robbing, which we don't run into much anymore, and environmental crime, basically about throwing your refuse out on the street. You see the poor guys running away. Another interesting fact about this book, at the very end, Dan Howder, two things. One, much of the text is actually plagiarized from another book, a large part of it. And also at the end, Dan Howder in the first editions had an addendum saying, you'll notice that 3 or 4 of the laws don't have pictures. And that's because these lazy artists would not deliver their work on time. And so he put the blame on them. Here's another one of the great illustrated law books. There's 3 large volumes that form the basis of canon law that were good law all the way up until 1917, come from the Middle Ages. And there's over, in the 3 volumes, there's over 450 of these little woodcuts. This one is about some sort of a type of loan, but just wonderful, wonderful illustrations. So histories. So there are some illustrations that depict actual historical events. This is from a book of that same set, the Liber Sextus of Pope Boniface VIII, who is actually kind of the author, so to speak, of the book. He ordered its compilation. I contend this is one of the most unflattering depictions of an author you'll ever see in a law book. Boniface was a ruthless politician. And there's 2 things happening here. Boniface succeeded Celestine V, who was one of the very few popes who ever abdicated. Celestine was a very simple guy. He just decided, this is not for me. And a lot of people accused Boniface of convincing him to abdicate so that he could take his place. So you see Boniface with a fox pulling off the tiara, the papal tiara from Celestine, who has the dove of the Holy Spirit above his head. And on the other side, Boniface carried on a long and bloody and bitter feud with the Colonna clan. And here they show he actually was taken prisoner by the Colonnas and died as their prisoner. So just an interesting thing. The trial of King Charles I with a key showing who all's there and what their roles are. Here's an Inquisition trial from Italy for putting a priest on trial for heresy. Again, with a lettered code, so you can see who the people are, what their roles are. Also kind of interesting for understanding procedure at that time. You understand who the players are, where they're situated, because all those things, their locations in space, tell something about their roles. This is another great illustration. This is Picton was the governor of Trinidad, the British governor of Trinidad, and he accused this teenage woman of color, Luisa Calderon, of some minor crime, of shoplifting, I don't know, something. But he inflicted this terrible torture that was actually designed for British soldiers. I mean, you can see there, she's dangling by a rope with this pointed things sticking on her foot. It's a terrible thing. And he was put on trial for this. A version of this illustration is actually the very first, we believe it's the very first image that was actually admitted as evidence in an English court. And there were also demonstrators outside that were holding copies, versions of this image. It became one of the big events in the history of the abolition movement in England. The trial of President Garfield's assassin. Again, you kind of see how trials occurred, how people were dressed. The judge has no robe on there. So, and here's a final example. This is from the Nuremberg trials. This is basically a seating chart for the judges, so they could know who the defendants were, who the people were, and where they were. So, comics. There's another. So there's actually a number of things here that I think are really fun. A lot of more modern things. Here's the Lemonade Cartel. This is a comic book about antitrust that the Brazilian government put out. Color Me Secured is done by two law professors from St. Mary's in San Antonio on secured transactions, a coloring book on secured transactions. So here's a kind of the graphic novel approach to teaching criminal procedure. And I talked to I had the chance to meet the author, Mr. Burney, and he says a lot of law students are using these books to study for the bar exam, but it's a really effective way of conveying information. Here's an example from China about the new marriage law. Kind of shows a different sort of legal process. Here's a really interesting genre, and I think a really important genre. These coloring books and things like that are prepared for children who find themselves in court. I just feel by and it makes a lot of sense. I just feel like there ought to be more work done like this. You have children, they're in court, they're probably scared. They're terrified. What's going to happen to mommy and daddy? Who's the guy in the black robes? So they're trying to explain to children in their language what's going on and what their role is, trying to take away some of the anxiety that's probably surrounding their presence there. This is from an actual legal, an amicus brief that was done for a case involving price fixing in ebooks. And it was submitted to the court. It actually abides by all the court's rules for submitting amicus briefs. And it's done as basically, again, as a graphic novel. And I love the last there's the lawyer and the woman who's this kind of this, his interlocutor there. So he says at the end, you should have been a lawyer. He says, no, not for me. I'm a novelist and it's impossible to tell a complex story in only 5 pages. So it's kind of a great, makes a good point there. There's several of these that I found briefs that are illustrated. Here's another, I love this one. The text in here is the complete iTunes terms and conditions agreement. And what the guy has done, this guy Sikoriak, has illustrated it. Each page is a tribute to a different comic artist. But if you look, and almost every single panel, there's Steve Jobs, and with this, this turtleneck and so forth. And it's outlandish. I love it. He did the same treatment for the U.S. Constitution. The French were especially fond of doing this sort of thing. These are illustrations of the Code Civil. There's an act of opposition to marriage there. So there was a number of French, especially in the 20th century, French artists who illustrated these legal texts. My favorite of all is Joseph Aymar, one of the most prolific book illustrators of the 20th century from France. This is what he did with the penal code. This is basically involuntary manslaughter. But it's interesting because the text is the text of the law. He doesn't mess with the text, but he just illustrates it. It's just, the illustrations wouldn't be near as funny without this dry legal text sitting next to it. He also did the family law section of the Code Civil. So there's stuff about divorce and all sorts of things. Just this illustration technique is called pochoir. It's a stencil technique. And even years and years later, the colors just still pop. They're great. His masterpiece is the tax code, the most boring kind of law book you can imagine. But he's, I don't know, over 100 illustrations in this. So you can see there his kind of commentary on taxation in general. Here, depreciation, hiding of assets on the other side, personnel expenses, and this is about the law on the tax on balconies and other protruding constructions. So. And here is the way he opens all the 3 big chapters in at the end. So kind of see the tax man taking everything they have. So just great. So finally, real quick, a couple of things. Some firsts. The very first portrait of an author in a printed book is in a law book. This 1479 book of Paolo Attavanti, who was a monk. And it's basically a summary of canon law. The first printed map of England in a book is in this JP Justice of the Peace Manual by Lambarde. The very first depiction of a yo-yo is the satire of the Constitution. So finally, some things from San Francisco. This is a trial of he was a member of the Vigilance Committee who was murdered, and the Vigilance Committee then lynched his assailant.
Are these ones in our collection here when you say from San Francisco?
This one, I don't know. I didn't see this one. I don't. It's a good question. We should find out, right? This is the Terry contempt. David Terry was a Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court before the Civil War. Pretty violent guy. He killed a guy in a duel. Afterwards, he got involved with a woman he married, but she claimed that a rich guy in San Francisco had married her, and she deserved to have all of the property and the inheritance. The judge in the trial was sitting on circuit was Justice Stephen Field of the U.S. Supreme Court. Field ruled against them, and she got up and pulled a pistol out of her skirt. Terry pulled out his Bowie knife, and they were convicted and jailed for 6 months for contempt. They kept on insulting and threatening Field, and then Terry and Field, Justice Field, were on the same train. I can't remember Lathrop or Stockton, and Terry walked up and slapped Field in the face, and Field's bodyguard, a U.S. Marshal, pulled out a gun and shot him dead. So kind of interesting bit of San Francisco history there. This is the very last tree of consanguinity that I'm aware of that appeared in a law book, and it's in the civil codes of the state of California, in the very first edition. Great, here's another one, the Book Club of California, the fugitive slave trial, really wonderful illustration. Here, oops, I skipped over. This is done by the ACLU, the National Lawyers Guild, excuse me, here in San Francisco, a guide for what to do when you get arrested. It's part of a 16-page comic book. Really interesting thing, basically law for, And then the People's Law School published a number of small pamphlets. This is on rights of patients here. Great illustration. The chart is the Dow Jones Industrials, kind of giving a commentary on the economy of modern medicine. And finally, this one, the trial of Dan White, a poetic investigation, the assassin of Harvey Milk. So a few conclusions we can list. Again, this goes back to using this collection as a data set. And if you graph it, this is just based on what's at Yale. You can see how illustrations increased and then gradually fell off. Now it's partially distorted because printing didn't start until 1455. The 21st century is not yet over. So, and it's just Yale's collection, but still, once you get, a couple of thousand data points, you can start to have some confidence in the conclusions. And if you dig deeper, most of these, of the early stuff is illustrations in the professional legal literature, books by lawyers for lawyers. And after the 18th century, it's much, much more in the popular literature of the law. And also, mainly European before up to the 18th century, afterwards, mainly Anglo-American popular literature in the Anglo-American world. So this kind of illustrates this kind of an application of this theory of collecting. Michael Zinman was he's still alive, one of the great modern collectors of Americana. And this is his theory is quoted by Bill Reese. You don't start off with a theory about what you're trying to do. You build a big pile. Once you get a big enough pile together, the critical mess, you're able to draw conclusions about it. You see patterns, and that's really what I tried to do. Using collections of its data set, and you start seeing here, for instance, in these things, connections between law and technology, law and society. We see how visual imagery has been employed or avoided in a largely textual discipline. We see how legal literature has both embraced and forsaken the visual. And finally, collections like this enabled you to raise new questions, also cuts across disciplinary boundaries and provide new answers to old questions. So I'll just finally mention, if you want to see lots of images, I built a Flickr site that's still up on Flickr with 8,800 images. If you go there, the best way to browse it, there's a tab called albums, and there's 140 different albums, things related to legal themes, aspects of the book itself, and so forth. And, anyway, I encourage you to take a look. Uh, so that's all that I had. So, questions, anybody? Comments?
I was wondering a little bit about your process. What kind of outreach did you do to gather all these books together? And as far as the older volumes, did you have preservation issues with them? I imagine some of these books from the 1600s were in pretty bad shape.
Actually, I'll take the second part first. The older books, a lot of them are actually in much better shape. The paper is just, I've seen paper from incunables, books printed before 1500, where it still has this wonderful drape to the paper, You look at especially late 19th, early 20th century books, law books in particular, where they skimped on paper quality. The paper's acidic, it's brittle. You open the pages, you end up with a lap full of cornflakes, basically. So and so in that sense, no, they've actually done very well. There's some have condition issues, but nothing big. I'm not very fond of rebinding also. But I think that now the first part, how I did this, well, I started looking. First, I'd look through the books that we have, and you have an idea of what kind of books to look at. An idea, which isn't always the right idea. You learn sometimes that your instincts aren't always correct. But I started talking to dealers. I would go to book fairs, especially the New York and Boston book fairs, and I would talk to dealers. I said, look, I'm looking for law books with illustrations. And they would start quoting them to me. And I'd say yes, or they'd say sometimes it would be had the coat of arms. I said, no, thanks. This doesn't really fit. This is more what I'm looking at, So communicating with the dealers was really important because they got stuff. They offered me stuff that otherwise I wouldn't have seen. A lot of times they start offering it to me before they put it in their catalogs, or before they take it to the fair in New York, And so for that reason also, I was interested in building a great collection, not a cheap collection. So I hardly ever bargained with dealers over the price. Partly, if they're quoting you something, they're doing you a favor. And so I pay the favor back by paying what they asked for. Now, there's a few cases where sometimes I'd say, look, if it's a really expensive book, say like a middle five-figure book, I said, look, my library director is going to be reticent about this. But if you offer a discount, and I said, you don't have to offer a discount. If you can't, just say no. I will never hold it against you. But if you can, it'll help me to sell the book to my boss. And they would generally do that. I had also sometimes, I remember one book at the New York Fair, the guy said, here it is. Oh, this is great. It's $4,000. Oh, look, I'm really interested. I have to, since it's over my limit, I need to get permission first, which was 3,000. I said, well, let's just make it 3,000. So, okay. and I did it. So, but I was never fond of bargaining with book dealers. So so anyway,
Thank you.
sure. Anybody else? Yeah.
For those of us not in the know, what's the New York Fair?
The New York Antiquarian Book Fair, the most important rare book fair. So basically book dealers from all across Europe, Latin America, the United States, a few from Asia, they come there. It's sponsored by the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers. So the dealers have to be members of the association or an affiliate organization. So they go there, they pay a hefty sum in order to have a booth there. But they have a booth, they put out their books. And so for 3 days, they have a fair, and collectors and librarians and people that are just curious. One of the sister fairs, the California Rare Book Fair, which happens, I think it switches between LA and San Francisco every year. It's a great thing to go, even if you're are not going to buy a single book. It's like a museum where a lot of times you can actually go ask permission to look at the books. You know, you should always ask. Never grab things off of a book dealer's shelf at a book fair, but ask politely. And a lot of times, it's a great way to learn about books in general, and just to see some incredible stuff that you would never be able to buy. But it's amazing. I love going to the fairs. So that's what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there was.
I think you wrote a book. Do you have that with you? Can you tell us what that's about? And
Oh, this is the catalog to the Grolier Club
Oh, it's the cat.
exhibit. It's from 2017. So it's basically the images and the labels for all of the 140 books that we put on exhibit. Plus, there's an introductory essays. I wrote one. My co-curator, Mark Widener, a legal historian, wrote one. Also, there's one by Yolanda Goldberg, who law librarians might know. She's the author of the case schedule. She created the Library of Congress classification schedule for law books. Her, and then Erin Blake, who teaches the history of book illustration course at Rare Book School. She wrote another essay. So and it's a Law Book Exchange published it. You can still buy a copy from them. So that's what that is. Yeah. So yeah.
I really appreciated you showing your distribution of the years of, how many books you have in different centuries
Yeah.
in the Yale collection. And it was really interesting to see how it doesn't really fall like you would think the explosion of book illustration in the 19th century, but it's actually goes down.
Uh-huh.
And I was just curious about, especially the illustrations, like the allegorical ones and the genre ones that don't seem to be like necessary to communicate the information in the book.
Yeah.
Like why your theories about why this might have been there. If I was wondering also if you made a graph of like the formats of the books that the illustrations were in, like was it mostly folios and quartos, or like more expensive books, or did you see them in like cheaper, smaller books too? Or I was just curious about why they would go to the trouble of the expense of adding these kind of illustrations and
Okay.
books.
Well, there's a couple of things. All right. No, but that's great. Those are great. Let's talk about the last part again first. In the 19th century, beginning, then that's where most of the illustrations you see there are in popular literature.
Yeah.
So they're pamphlets like the one at the People's Law School, and there's a lot of 20th century pamphlet material on civil rights. The Communist Party was a big publisher of material about, especially about trials. So there's stuff like that. A lot of the American trial literature of the 19th century was pamphlet material. It's really more. It's equivalent to Law and Order on TV today. I mean, murder and sex and all that sells. And so there was a lot of that. A lot of it illustrated. You see the murderer, stabbing his wife or whoever it was. So there's lots and lots of that. And in law reform also, which generally, but so this gets back to the other thing. The early literature, the early illustrations, a lot of those are in serious law books. And so why don't they keep doing that? My own theory is that I think allegory in general kind of went out of fashion. Also, I think lawyers started looking at it like, we're a serious profession. We don't need all this picture stuff. I think it became like unprofessional, or like they just, and you see it even in just the design, the typography of law books in general from 19th century on. they don't really make much effort to make it look pretty, you know?
Why they were illustrating them before rather than the opposite, because most law books, did they have frontispieces and illustrations?
No, not most of them. Still, even in the old ones,
Yeah.
illustrations were the exception, but a lot less of an exception before the 19th century.
Mhm.
So they were concerned about, well, marketing for one thing. You know, in the 17th and 18th centuries, books didn't have book jackets like they do today with, you know, illustrations on them. So those were marketing devices for one thing. I think there was more of a desire to think about, you know, there was a propaganda aspect to it. I think that was part of it, especially, you know, showing, you know, the ruler as an important source of law. You know, there's a lot of dialogue going on there, messaging about the nature of law and who makes law and so forth, the nature of what does justice mean. And all of that kind of went out of fashion. You know, why? That's a great question. That's a really good question. I'm not going to try and answer it, but somebody should. I think that's a meaty thing to sink your teeth into. So, anybody else?
Books you have on display here, I was curious where they're
Yeah.
from and if those.
Well, we can-
Presentation.
Let's look at it, but I'll get, there's another question, then we'll look at the books. Thank you.
I had a question for when you were building this collection at Yale, did you have interactive sessions with students where you use them to teach things, or was it just kind of for show and for these special exhibits and for the strength of the collection?
No, I did. There was, I did work with classes that were teaching legal history, also, and history classes in general. A lot of my use actually more of it came from outside of the law school than from inside. There was in particular a guy named Richard Rose that he's a printer that taught a class on the history of the printed word. And he would bring his class over every year. And that was really more fun because they had zero interest in the text, but they had a lot of interest in the typography and the paper and the illustrations and so forth. And they got a lot out of it. It was super fun to do. And so also there was about the law school, a woman, a professor, man and wife, Judith Resnick and her husband, Dennis Curtis, did a major book about the imagery of justice, focusing on justitia. So I supplied her. She kept me super busy with images. She actually did a seminar, a whole semester-long seminar on that topic that I participated in. We did an exhibit together, her and people from her class and me. So that was that was one of the other things that we did. So yeah. So with that in mind, I thank you for mentioning that. Let's talk about some of the books. Let's maybe go over here first, because this will be simpler to, I want to show you all this one. Come up and this is a great book that all these are here from the San Francisco Law Library. So this is a really stunning tree of consanguinity. It's a very brief work on consanguinity. And this is one of the prettiest trees of consanguinity I've ever seen. If I'd have seen this when I was at Yale, I would have snatched it up in a moment. It's a very rare book. I looked it up this morning. There's only 4 other known copies of this. There's 2 in Italy. There's 1 in Colombia and 1 across the bay at Berkeley. Just a beautiful book, printed in 1506 in Pavia in northern Italy, which is a big center for legal education at the time and legal publishing. So beautiful book. Just love that. You know, I love the Picasso-like aspect of the faces. You know, that's the thing. Woodcuts kind of force you to simplify stuff, and what it ends up doing, it makes the image jump. You know, it gives it a clarity, kind of cartoon-like in some ways, but I like it. You know, these strong, you know, blacks. So anyway, that's that's that book there. So we can, let's,
Do you know the history of how the library acquired all these books? If you don't, maybe Diane. Because
what I understand, she may have, correct me, the way I understood it, there was a couple of directors here from the 1920s up to the 50s, 60s that did a lot of this.
Well, I guess the history that I was thinking about, and if you, I don't know, I'll make it quick, but
Sure.
we lost the entire collection in that it's file, everything, right? So go ahead. Diane.
So
This is our librarian, for those of you who don't know.
So the San Francisco Law Library used to be in City Hall, which burned to the ground after the great earthquake and fire, sadly. And people took great pity upon us, and the librarians at the time were prominent legal community members. And they worked with people that were going to Europe to acquire rare books. And so the lore that I understand it from our previous director is that we were on a short list of 4 institutions that they would come back and offer these treasures to. I think one being the Supreme Court, 2 being Ivy League law schools, and the 4th being us. And so anything that was passed over ended up in our collection. And it was housed in City Hall until the City Hall was retrofitted under the Mayor Brown's administration. And then once we were moved out, it went into storage at UC Berkeley and temperature controlled storage. And then we had a fight with the city over getting a new location where we are today. And so just about 4 or 5 years ago, our Rare Book came back to its home. So we have the 2nd floor downstairs where we have on-site storage of all of our prior editions of treatises and everything that are in general use, as well as the rare book collection. And so now we're organizing it. Mike is working with us to advise us on handling it and how we can make it researchable and usable to the greater community. And I just also want to give a shout out to Ursula over here, who did a special project for us, indexing everything on massive spreadsheets. But that's kind of how we came to be with all this.
I'll add 2 things. One, it shows the importance of cultivating relationships with dealers, because that's what happened, how this collection was built. I think it was Carswell, that was the main guy who was going to Europe and buying books and coming back. And the other thing, it's a great collection. I was amazed when I first saw it. I think it's one of the 10 or 12 top rare law book collections in the country. And that's saying quite a bit, actually. I could go on, but it's a very strong collection. So with that said, I'll show you quickly the other books here, all also from the collection. The one over there is another edition of Beccaриa's Treatise on Crime and Punishment with the same image, not the identical image. It's actually facing the other way, but it's the same concept. I actually didn't mention one thing. That illustration was that the conception of it is Beccaria's. It's not some illustrator's idea of what to put on there. It was his idea of what to put on his book. And I think that's actually more truer than most people suspect for a lot of early modern printed books with frontispieces. The role of the author in not being the artist, but the guy, the providing the idea behind the artist. Mm-hmm. These are meant to be read as part of the text. They're not just a pretty picture. Here's another edition of the book that turned me on. It's actually printed the same year as the one that I bought in Texas and also at Yale, but it's printed in Venice instead of Bologna. Other than that, it's the same book. It's beautiful. Again, these woodcuts, which I just love. Mm-hmm. And then here finally is another edition of the Damhouder's treatise on criminal law, which The only reason it's on fornication is because that's only where the book wanted to open. I'm not trying.
About the prior use.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I'm not. No comment. But, it's a wonderful book, and the fact that it stayed in use for so long, for a century, that for a law book, that's really extraordinary. There's very few other books. Blackstone's commentaries, there's a couple of law dictionaries, that I can think of, and a few others. The history of legal publishing is really a land. Anyway, that was it. Just, and they're just, they have great copies of these lovely books.